Recording in progress.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight, your host for today and pretty much every episode. I'm grateful so much for everybody coming to join us to talk about all of the different intersections between psychology and culture, and this is a pretty good one. If you tuned in of your own free will, then did you? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Or were you taken in by my impressive marketing machine that is the Broken Brain? If you've been listening at all, you know that's not true, especially if you try to follow me in my sporadic social media. But we are going to talk about ways that we are drawn into, manipulated, sold, convinced, and hoodwinked. See that? Do you like that, Mara, how I worked that in?
Yes, that was very well done. Thank you.
We're talking about an exciting new book by Mara Einstein. I just did it. Oh, my gosh. So Mara Einstein. We just talked about how people will pronounce it differently than like Albert, and it must have got in my head. That's what it was.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
With author Mara Einstein. There we go.
Let me help you out there.
Yeah, exactly. You know that I'm not one, right? So Mara Einstein is a professor of media studies at Queens College, City University of New York. She's a marketing consultant and a writer about all things media. And we're here to talk about your new book, Hoodwinked, How Marketers Use the Same Tactics as Cults.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Einstein, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Let's maybe just let's start out by telling everybody a little bit about yourself and how did you come to writing about this aspect of media at this time?
Sure. I actually started my career as an actress way back when, but pretty quickly moved in. I always wanted to be part of entertainment somehow, and that sort of didn't work out as often it doesn't. But I went to school. I got my MBA in the 80s because that's what everybody did. And I worked at advertising agencies. I worked on Miller Lite. I worked on Dole Foods. I worked on Uncle Ben's Rice, which not even sure it's called Uncle Ben's anymore.
I'm not sure if that one made it through. There was the rebranding thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I got switched. But I always wanted to go back to entertainment. And so I then switched over and worked in marketing for MTV Networks. I worked at VH1. And from there, I went to NBC. And after working in entertainment for about 10 years, I sort of felt like, not sure this is the best use of my energy on the planet to get people to watch more television. So I actually got my PhD in something called media ecology, which is the study of what happens when a new technology enters into a society along the teachings of Marshall McLuhan, people are aware of. The medium is the message. And how is the system changed by the change in the technologies that we use? And so I decided to become an academic, which I did about 25 years ago. And since then, this is now my 8th book, mostly about marketing, some media policy wonk stuff. But I started looking at religion and marketing specifically about 25 years ago. And I began to see that there were considerable overlaps between how these two things work. And today we even talk about people who are loyal to a particular brand as marketing evangelists, people who will go out and tell other people to come join and be part of the group. But what was interesting to me was that over the last 10, 20 years or so, with the introduction of social media, that's when you begin to see it shift from not just being the relationship between brands and marketing and religion, but in fact cranks it up to that next level of cult-like behavior.
Mm-hmm. And with everything getting so accelerated and then attaching to, I really like the work in your book when you talk about the individuals who have become influencers and how you break down the different number of followers and things all the way from the stratospheric millions down to just a few or whatever. Anyway, and just how that personalism has kind of attached to products, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, I've noticed with tech as well, anybody who's into listening to podcasts will also know, like my daughter and I will tease each other by saying something like, oh, Squarespace can help you do that. Or, whatever, Casper mattresses that come in a box on your porch.
Right.
These are not sponsors of my show, by the way. Although, hey, Squarespace, if you're out there, hit me up.
Well,
But
yeah,
just the
but the
medium of
interesting
podcast has like 10 or so things that just seem to rotate through MeUndies, whatever, that rotate through podcasts. And so different mediums seem to have different ones as well.
Well, the thing about influencers, every influencer at sort of different levels in terms of their followers have different sort of advantages for advertisers. So, of course, you've got the big celebrity ones that work the same way as celebrities did in other so-called legacy media. But the nano influencers that have either under 5,000 or under 10,000, depending upon who comes up with that taxonomy, is they have more engagement with the people that they interact with because they have a smaller follower base. And so they have that ability to be able to know the people who are following them a bit better. The other thing that I talk about in the book, and it was really kind of fun and interesting for me to deconstruct it a bit, was to look at sort of the trajectory and history of social media over time and how the incentives that get built into the system over time change the kind of content that these influencers are going to produce. So the more if you're paid based on how many follows you have, if you're paid based on branding, it's going to play into what kind of content you're going to produce and who it is you want to talk to with that content.
It gets into now when we say things like tactics of a cult, right? A space cult. It sounded like I said a cult. That's not really so much what we're doing.
Right.
Although isn't there something magical about Casper mattresses? Anyway, but when you get into language like that, there's a sinister feel to it, and that's one of the things I think is very interesting. Is how you're approaching, kind of looking at the difference between just a marketing approach, kind of a brand lifestyle, reaching out, and then the more kind of devious and destructive types of manipulation that we might see.
Yeah. Well, the way that people think about cults, and it's interesting because I'm teaching a class about this book now, and it's interesting to think of someone who is of my generation or even millennials who, might not have grown up so much with like the Jim Jones and Jonestown and Waco and all of that, but at least have a good idea of what these really horrific cults were all about. What I'm finding with my students is that they have no context for this. And so when I introduced them and showed a little bit of a video of Jonestown, some of them were rightly so horrified. They had no idea that 909 people had drunk cyanide in a mass suicide. Now, these are obviously really horrific events, and so it sticks in people's brains as that's what cults are. But in fact, that's not what cults have been over time. And in the 17th century, it was a group of people or a religious sect that looked up to a person or an ideology or a belief system, but there wasn't anything negative about it. And by the 19th century, that expanded to include non-religious ideas and people. And it's only this small period of time from like the 1970s to 2000 that we have this very negative connotation connected to the word cult. And it's at about the time of 2000 that begins to shift because of what happens in social media spaces. And we have this use of the idea of the word cult to be applied to a whole lot of things, many of which don't end up with people killing themselves. The other thing that happened is that as media began to splinter, brands had to find ways to be able to connect with their followers, connect with their customers, and they couldn't do it the way they had done through television. And so they needed to make brands that much more important to people. And the North Star for brands right now is to make sure that their brand becomes a cult. And they talk about it being a brand cult. They're very conscious of it.
Yeah. Industries have always been good about finding out the way that people form attachments to things, and particularly addiction science and the psychology of addiction is something that industries. I mean, you can look at the ingredients in food, the food industry, different things like that. That gambling, gaming. Basically, if you can tie in with the addictive process, then you're solid, right? That's that.
Right, right.
You have a customer for life. And one of the things, pardon me, I threw myself off there for a second, thinking about that other thing, but yeah. So what would you be able to give everybody a definition, first of all, of what is a cult, so that we know what we're talking about when we're talking about those techniques?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's certain aspects to a cult. Not everything that one thinks about as being related to a cult is necessarily used by a brand marketer, but a whole lot of them are. So the first step in the process of what happens with a cult is they look for people who are vulnerable. And when people are vulnerable, they're more open to information, ideas, wanting to be part of a group. And they're also looking for a way to relieve that loneliness, any kind of despair, any vulnerabilities that exist. Now, one of the places that cults tend to like to find vulnerable people is college campuses. And students are just coming to campus. They don't know anybody. They don't have a social group. And somebody says, come on out and have a free dinner. Well, what college student doesn't like free food? So off they go running. And then when it comes to marketers have always looked for our vulnerabilities. They talk about finding your pain point. And depending upon how disreputable an organization is, they will try to find your pain point and push it as hard as they can in order to get you to buy. Now, it might not even be quite that awful in terms of what marketers are doing, because just basic advertising is based on the idea that there's something not right with you, and if you buy my product, you can correct what that is. So in that way, there's a real kind of parallel that exists.
It's quite a range, though, of all the way from just normal selling to building a whole self-perception or taking advantage of a self-perception.
Yeah, and one of the ideas I think about, and I don't even think I talk about this in the book, is for-profit colleges. They were notorious for using these kinds of scams, because what they would do is play on people's wanting to do better for their family, or feeling like they were somehow less than because they didn't have a college degree. And the person who was selling it to them just wanted them to sign on the dotted line so they could get the student loan payments from the government. But once you get past that vulnerability stage, what you get to is the deception. So the second stage in the process for cults is to be deceptive and not tell people right away what it is that they're trying to sell. You can talk about the FTC has a whole scam area as part of the organization. And so, we could talk about all kinds of examples in terms of marketing. And then it becomes love bombing, the idea that you tell people how wonderful they are, you get them part of the group. That happens in both spaces. Now, what happens in cults and may not happen in brands is the sensory deprivation, and those sorts of things. But what does happen is in and out groups. And in and out groups are how groups define themselves. They define themselves about what they are, but they define themselves by who they're not. And so traditionally with cults, when people think about cults, you think about them having to be somewhere away from the rest of everybody else, because they needed to, one, make sure they could define themselves, but also make sure that nobody in the group was going to hear from somebody else that what they were doing is somehow wrong. Now, in the social media space, and this is why marketers work the same way, is that we have been siloed into groups of people who agree with everything that we do. And excuse me, and it's very rare that we step outside that silo to find somebody who disagrees with what we have to say. And so we don't need to go to a compound anymore. We can just stay in social media spaces and people will agree with us. One of the key differences, though, is that it is easier to leave a brand cult than it is to leave a more traditional cult. So, if you really want to go, you can go. The other thing is that cults tend to have or have charismatic cult leaders. They also have an overriding ideology that explains all of your life problems. So if you think of something like MAGA, right, Make America Great Again, no one really knows what that means.
Right.
People have some kind of vague idea of what it means, and if I can look at that and see the red hat, then I know my life's going to be good, right? But it's a very nondescript, not really helpful way to think about the world, and that if I just follow this charismatic leader, that all will be well. And what also, yeah.
No, you go ahead.
And one of the final things in terms of cults, but not necessarily brand cults, is that they make it difficult for you to leave. Now, we certainly see this in terms of multi-level marketing, and that's one of the things that I talk a lot about in the book, because when I asked a cult leader or asked a cult expert, and I asked people in multi-level marketing, if you had to create a Venn diagram between multi-level marketing and a cult, and what would it look like? They all said it would look like a circle. So, multi-level marketing makes it very difficult for people to leave.
Well, that's one of the things I really enjoyed that section of your book, because we look at something stretching all the way from, this new bright packaging or flavor or whatever of something that's right by the checkout stand. And, it's an engaging sense of novelty or not wanting to miss out on something or whatever, and, I made a little impulse purchase that was $5, all the way up to, I overspent a little. And then you get up to where that's a, marketing, a whole idea of a lifestyle aesthetic, and then that can change sort of how people live, all the way into when you get into MLMs, that's someone's livelihood, that's their family, that's that's generational, as a matter of fact, and certainly seems to prey more heavily upon those that maybe have less experience with different kinds of companies or institutions, those that are lower income, that need the money more, and then spend a lot of time actually developing skills that are pretty, they get, people are clever, and people come up with things that they can work really, really hard and never get that reward. And so, stretching all the way, this whole concept has quite a range of all the way down to, I feel a little silly, being manipulated to buy that, all the way up to, this made a tremendous impact in my financial or career life, sort of a thing.
And if you're talking about MLMs, we think about this being primarily a female issue, and it is usually in relationship to products like essential oils and maybe supplements and hair care things and things like that. But men are not immune to these either. And so men have been taken in by particular insurance and particularly cryptocurrency. And I did interview a number of people who worked in corporate marketing at multi-level marketing companies, none of whom would talk on the record, not surprisingly. Sure. But what they said was that, crypto is the big scam in multi-level marketing for men. And one of the people that I talk about in the book is Sam Bankman-Fried. He was brilliant. What he did is a really great example of how these tactics come into play. So here you have a guy who, frankly, looks like he just stepped out of a windstorm half the time, right? He's worth billions of dollars. He's wearing like a cruddy t-shirt and cargo pants, and his hair looks like he hasn't seen a hairstylist or a barber in like 10 years.
Is there a thing? Is there any studies about charismatic cult-like leaders and hair and weird hair? I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole other thing someone could do.
But all of it felt like all of a sudden he came right out of nowhere. And so, for people who may not know, Sam Bankman-Fried was the gentleman who created FTX, and FTX was this trading platform for cryptocurrency. And the whole sales behind it was that this was an easy way to trade crypto. So for people who are afraid to get into that space, and a lot of people are, because crypto, can get kind of confusing, and purposely so, he was suggesting that no, this is something that anybody can do. It's easy. Anybody can get into this. And so one of the ways that they did this, and this was first to use influencers like Tom Brady, like Steph Curry, I think, and Naomi Osaka, so sports figures, and they didn't always say they were being paid by FTX. So that in and of itself is deceptive. The other thing that he did was then put an ad on the Super Bowl, which had Larry David in it. So what says this is for everybody more than an ad in the Super Bowl with Larry David? And then what happened, and this is the part that most people probably don't know about, is that there were a number of financial influencers with very large followings who were paid by an influencer marketing company. So an influencer marketing company hires a whole bunch of influencers to put out the same message at the same time. And so what was happening was there were a number of financial influencers who were suddenly saying things like, oh, Sam Bankman-Fried, he's fabulous, he's brilliant, he's come up with this thing. And there was somebody who discovered this and was listening and was like, this sounds really odd. Why is everybody using the exact same words to describe this guy? But they had big enough followings combined with the celebrity influencers, combined with the sort of everyday guy kind of marketing on the Super Bowl. And the next thing you know, he's got a very successful company. At the same point, he's saying, yes, I'm making all this money, but I'm also donating to charity. I'm also donating to political campaigns, which is what people want. They're like, oh, this guy's great. He's not just thinking of himself, all of that. Well, $10 billion later, people were out an awful lot of money.
Yeah. And that gets into what you say about that idealism, because then the charitable part becomes part of it. Especially when you find out sometimes that was all a scam anyway, or the affiliation with certain types of interests and things. And of where that kind of lands people. Yeah.
That's the whole idea of purpose washing. And that's something that I have dealt with in previous books. And if people are interested, I have downloads on my website, including something about purpose washing and how that works, how the hoodwink works, and how you can protect yourself against things like purpose washing. But one of the reasons why brands do that is that millennials, it started with millennials, but it's also true with Gen Z, as certain aspects of our society and our culture had less influence on us as identifiers, the market came in to fill that space. And so instead of being identified as Methodist or being, part of the Baptist church or being somebody who worked at IBM for 30 years, where Starbucks or Dunkin', where Under Armour or Nike, right? And so I use those things as identifiers, and because they become so much a part of who we are, we want them to present a certain value system. And that's become something that all brands do. I mean, it's funny in terms of multi-level marketing, Tupperware did it because everybody else does it. All of the multi-level marketing companies do it too, but theirs was sustainability, and I couldn't help but laugh. And people were sort of like, "Yeah, but that makes sense. They make these plastic products." Blah, blah, blah. I said, "Yeah, they make plastic products so you don't have to constantly throw out plastic bottles, but at the same point, they're making this plastic that is utterly indestructible, so you have it for 40 years." And at the same point, because it's a multi-level marketing company, they constantly need to be selling new products. So then they're coming up with like plastic bottles in the shape of a minion, the minion character, the minion character.
Right, sure. The new line.
Cool minion
Why do you need yeah. If your goal is sustainability, why do you need a new line of products every year, right? Or whatever.
Exactly right.
Yes.
Exactly right.
Kind of thing. Huh. Using the psychology and the emotional life of people is a big facet of this, particularly is the use of anxiety. I have one of the quotes I really like from your book is that, and you use this with several principles throughout, but that anxiety is not a bug of the system; it's a feature, right? It's an intended thing.
Yes.
I often think I've thought a lot about. In the movie Scrooged, if anybody out there, recognizes that reference, the old Bill Murray movie, which was a modern take on the Christmas Carol kind of comedically. He's a television programmer, executive or whatever, and there's some terrible Christmas special extravaganza they're trying to air on Christmas Eve to and somebody's, he's talking to the people about how to market this. And someone says, yeah, we want people to want to see it. And he grabs somebody and he's like, no, they have to be so afraid that they're going to miss it.
Yes. Well, that's FOMO. And it's so funny to me because most people think, oh, that was probably created by a millennial somewhere. No, it was created by a marketing strategist. This idea of the fear of missing out was created by a marketing strategist who wanted to make people anxious about the fact that they might miss out on something that was really important. And people probably know, marketers do this kind of thing all the time in terms of, the Xbox, you have to pick it up right away because we'll run out before you want to buy it for Christmas. And no, it's not like they couldn't have it ready for you. Of course they could, but if they want to make sure that it feels like that you can't. But it relates to the idea of anxiety is that if you asked an economist would say that we're living in an attention economy. And so the idea is that the way that people are making money is off our attention, off our being in front of our phones or being in front of our tablets or computers all the time. Because the more we spend giving our time and attention to these spaces, the more money they make from advertising. And what I'm arguing is that it's not an attention economy, it's an anxiety economy, because it is based on us being so ramped up and anxious and worried about what's going on in the world at any given point in time that we stay connected to the technology. So it's anxiety, doom scrolling, anxiety needs to be released, so I purchase. Right. And so when we were talking before about, what's the difference between how a marketer works and how a cult works, when we talked about the steps of what the cults go through, what marketers think of is what's known as the marketing funnel. And so the top of the funnel is awareness. And so they want people to find out about their product. And then the next step in the process is consideration. Is this a product that I want to buy? This third step is called conversion, which kind of cracks me up, right? Because it's not purchase, it's conversion, right? Converting you to a brand purchaser. And then loyalty. And now we don't just talk about it as loyalty, we talk about people being marketing evangelists. Now, in the traditional, marketing framework, the awareness happened by you seeing a commercial on your television screen. Then you might consider, maybe I need to buy, a new sweater. And then you think about it, and then you go shopping and you stand in front of that sweater, and then you think, you know what, $100 on a sweater is probably more than I want to spend. And then you may or may not buy it. But what the anxiety does in the online space is it collapses the funnel so that the time between awareness to the purchase to you then, right? Because you buy it. And then, of course, as soon as you buy it, you want to go back online because the system is set up for you to do this, to then go online and tell everybody else how wonderful it is.
And many times there's a prompt. Hey, do you want to share that you got this? Click here.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Exactly right. Exactly right.
What should people be aware of, or if they want to make more purposeful based decisions, then is it simply trying to slow down that process yourself, or what kinds of things would you suggest, or how do you participate with media that's trying to get you to do stuff?
Yeah. It two things, particularly now. One thing that I've been saying to people a lot lately is when I was growing up, we didn't listen to the news 24 hours a day. You got a newspaper in the morning, you read the newspaper, and then you'd come home at night and you'd watch the 6:30 or 7 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news, and that was it. You don't need to be aware about what's going on in the news 24 hours a day because you can't affect it anyway. And so that keeping you in that constant space of anxiety isn't good for you, doesn't make sense for you. The other thing is that I would say is be aware of when you are engaging with social media, whether you are in a space of being vulnerable. Because oftentimes what we will do is after a really long day and we're really tired, we sit down and then start scrolling through social media. It's probably the worst time of day to do it because you aren't engaging. You are trying to sit back, which is fine to do if you're watching a television show. It's not the same when you're engaging with social media. So I don't recommend that people use that as their relaxation thing at the end of the day. Do it first thing in the morning, right? Get on your elliptical and watch a little TikTok first thing in the morning or whatever. But doing it late at night is probably not the best idea.
Is there any kind of universal time of day where people are more likely to make impulsive decisions, by the way? Do you know? Or is that...
I don't know that.
Someone asked me that
I don't know that.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, the other thing is too, and I've always thought this, I mean, maybe it's just because of who I am. So many people get into an elevator. I live in New York. People get into an elevator, pull out their phone and start looking on their phone. I always start a conversation with people in the elevator. There's also, particularly now when people are so fearful, the way we're going to get over being fearful of one another, walk down the street and say good morning to people. Right? Look them in the eye and say, good morning. We are people. We need to start remembering how to connect with each other. If they don't want to say hi, they won't say hi.
No, and I think that one of the greatest things, we can't opt out of the grid completely in our world, in our culture, especially in a first world, nation or whatever, wherever we happen to be. Very, very not at least not very easily, and you certainly can't. I would argue that you almost can't completely without making that your whole thing. Basically, if you're going to Ron Swanson your way through life, maybe, but basically, so we can't totally avoid it. And there are some conveniences that we may opt into, and there might be times where we do decide, obviously, to purchase something, but. Obviously. However, doing so as purposefully and aware as possible and being mindful about that. And so I think that when we are partaking in more and more, especially when it's that automatic of like, oh, my phone's in my hand and I wasn't going to go on fill in the blank social platform today at all, but it's open. When did I do that? The more that we're doing that, we need to be aware that we're also being tracked, manipulated, that you could, they have programs that can tell us how long your mouse hovers over a different part of a web page, even if you don't click it. So they know.
Right. Well, people may recognize me from By Now, the Shopping Conspiracy, which was a documentary on Netflix. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in that documentary is all of the ways that companies are tracking us, that are, trying to create the interface in such a way to get us to buy. And we can't be conscious or aware. I mean, we can try to be, but we don't understand all the mechanisms of how these things work. But they've all been designed to get to the bottom of the brainstem, to get us to not think, to get us to play from the emotion. Again, this goes back to the anxiety economy. It's about trying to get to our emotional state in order to be able to get us to then want to buy. And that also tracks back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of influencers. Influencers know what is going to get rage is what's going to get attention, right? Hard, very extreme emotions are the things that are going to get people to share your posts. And so that also plays into it. So if you're also aware that what is getting engagement for people is anything that is filled with rage, that's going to make you angry, why would you want to spend that much time in that space? Wouldn't you rather spend time in a space where people are going to be nice to you?
And this is where it doubles into one of those things where we're spending more and more time in rage and anxiety, which has long-term health implications, not just, there's the mental and physiological health, cardiological consequences, and just, also cholesterol, cortisol, lots of things that end in all that are scary. So it's very useful. And I will also say, for me, I love the information that I get from nonfiction kinds of things. However, not all nonfiction reads are created equal, and some flow much better than others. And so this is one that if you're the kind of person like me who's like, oh, I'd love to read a nonfiction, but do I really want to? The ones that make it onto the show are generally the ones who you read and you're like, this is fun, and I want to keep reading this. And this is Hoodwinked is very much like that. I found as well, just as a reader.
Thank you.
So I want people to know where they can follow you and the best possible place to get the book. But first of all, I always like to ask everybody if they have a mode of giving back to the community that is near and dear to them that they would like to recommend to people. Could be an organization or a good practice, or perhaps a brilliant combination of both.
No.
Is there anything you would want to share with people?
Just because we were talking just about buy now, one thing that I'm not sure that people know about this, and this is a company, and I'm not connected to them, and I don't get anything for saying this. There's a company called Trashy, and they will recycle your clothing, and they will take everything. So unlike a lot of companies that do this kind of thing, they'll only take new clothes, or they'll only take clothes from men or from kids and from women. They will take everything, and if there's something that they don't use, they recycle it. So I found it's just one of the best ways that if people are trying to downsize and to make sure that their clothing gets repurposed. It's just one of the best things out there.
Oh, that's really cool. Because I know there's a lot where you can donate, but they have limited abilities of what to do with the volume of stuff that they're not going to give people. But in this case, they also have a recycling component as well to their job. That's really cool.
And I think you have to pay for the bag up front, but then they give you credit on the back end. So it all comes out in the wash.
Sure. Oh, that's very cool. I didn't know about them. Thank you. Well, where do people follow you and your work, and what do they, and is there a better place for them to find and buy Hoodwinked than others for you?
Sure. The best place to find me is starting at my website, which is Dr. Mara Einstein, DrMaraeinstein.com, Dr. Mara Einstein. That's what I am on all socials. You can find a link on the website to all the places where you can buy the book. If you want to, you can do Amazon, but you could also do, I like to recommend bookshop.org or Barnes & Noble. Bookshop.org supports independent bookstores. So if you're interested in that, you can purchase through them. I'm primarily on TikTok. TikTok is my primary social media platform, and I'll be on there as long as it's there. I do repurpose that to YouTube. So if people like video content, I do repurpose that onto YouTube as well.
Wonderful. Well, a quick reminder for everybody of our charity focus for this month. Every month, the Broken Brain picks a charity from a local area to promote. And this month, we are one that I came across that's very, very interesting. It's called Bake Their Day in Guam. You can go to baketheirday.org. They are a company that specializes in making birthday cakes for youth that are in homeless shelters, detention centers, treatment centers, kids who may not have that experience of being within a family structure and infrastructure where they may experience that on a regular basis. And so you can go to baketheirday.org to learn more about what they do. They're located, like I said, in Guam. And as they are our focused charity, as you know, if anybody wants to become a donor or a patron of the Broken Brain and get the bonus materials and help this show to exist, then 50% of your donation goes to the highlighted charity in the month that you joined. As long as you're a patron, it will continue to go to that charity, unless you ask us to switch it to another of our highlighted charities. That's okay too. You can do that, but definitely go to baketheirday.org, see if you can get involved. And as always, it never costs anything, as long as you're scrolling anyway, to share any of these good charities and organizations onto your social media feed, and you never know who's gonna see it. So, Dr. Einstein, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was terrific.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.